Good evening, Internet. Welcome to episode 8 of Games with Dave. I'm here with Wayne Robert from Weird Valley Press. Tonight we're going to be talking about Pan, His Majesty in Yellow. Wayne has also written the totally awesome Dungeon Plumbers, and he also has another project that is still in pre-order if you'd like to get behind it, called World Breaker, and there's a second part, The Dark Tides of Zeratos. So, and that's something I'm going to be jumping on here probably after this interview because I love your work, man.
Thank you, Dave, and
Oh,
thanks for having me here. I'm excited to talk shop and have a good conversation about games.
yeah, I am totally excited. So, I guess to start, I've got to know what got you to the point where you were like, I'm going to take some Ambrose Bierce and H.P. Lovecraft and mash it in with James Matthew Barrie.
Well, oh man, my brain's going a million miles right now. I feel like being a forever dungeon master, like in our hobby, in addition to being a game writer, I'm always um, taking ideas from different places and filing the serial numbers off and putting them back together in interesting ways. So while I like to think that I generate original content, we all borrow from others and we are all inspired by others and their work that has come before us, these titans that we stand on the shoulders of, so to speak. And when you do enough comparative analysis in anything, whether that be for work or for fun, you start to see patterns. And I have read a lot, like most of us have throughout life, and sometimes I see patterns that maybe aren't there because our brains are designed for that. And I noticed that a lot of the authors at the turn of the last century were often borrowing from each other or referencing each other almost in a like inside joke sort of way. H.P. Lovecraft and um, um, the rest of the authors of that time period, um, like Robert Howard's Conan and Hyperborea and things like that, like all of these different concepts and myths and names and characters, a lot of them they were just making nods to other authors' work that came before them. And when you remember that we have like, you know, the 1800s were preceded by literature in the 1700s, 1600s, and so on, and you look back, a lot of the inspiration came from like classic Greek myths and Western culture and things like in Western culture and things like that. So there's a lot of threads there that go all the way back. On the cover of the original King in Yellow, you'll see an image of Hastur, and in his hand he's holding this strange like scepter that's downward facing and it's on fire, and that's a thyrsus, which like ties in with the thyrsus of Dionysus. And like when I started seeing these little connections, and like I made a tapestry out of unrelated things that felt like they could be related, and that's kind of what happened here. I tried to take that subconscious, those subconscious archetypes, and weave them together in a new perspective, whether they're intentionally there or not. There were enough threads to pull on that I could make an image out of it.
well, from reading the review copy, I think you did a wonderful job of making an image of it. Um, One thing I think is I'm going to have fun absolutely horrifying my players with this.
Good.
Uh,
That delights
um,
me. Thank you.
One of the things that I remember reading in there was about how Peter Pan can perfectly mimic anyone's voice. And that instantly took my head to the Predator movie. When the Predator's up in the tree and it mimics, I believe it was to Carl Weather, and it's like, over here, over here. And he looks and nothing's there. And then pow, he got blasted. And I'm just like, oh man, it's going to be so fun to pull on players. You know, you get them isolated or something and have Peter Pan mimic someone else's voice and just lure them over and like, haha, you're mine.
Yes, you could absolutely, yeah, absolutely. There was a story in the original, a story about Peter Pan, the original stories, where he really got his kicks just tormenting Captain Hook and the pirates. Any adult he just loved to torment, and they were in they were playing in Mermaid Lagoon, and I guess the pirates show up, and Peter Pan starts mimicking this dark, ominous voice. And Captain Hook and the pirates, they think it's some sort of malevolent spirit or ghost. And he's got them really going, and he's got them terrified. They're about to run away. But Captain Hook, being the intelligent person that he is, kind of figures it out. So he asks the right questions, goading Peter Pan's ego on, and therefore Peter Pan was he's still a child. He has a child's mind. So even though he's horrifying, you can outsmart him. You just have to like use that like reverse psychology kind of thing. So he tricks Peter Pan into like revealing who it is, because he wants the recognition. He wants that, aha, it's me, I got you. He wants that moment more than he wants to actually win or to succeed at the task that he undertook. So remember, when you're scaring just like the wits out of your players, to reward, you know, outthinking a child who's extremely egocentric, because that's the core of that character.
I will remember that.
You'll have a lot of fun, and they will too, and it'll be even scarier when he comes back around.
So, yeah, he's because he can't die. So
Mhm.
that's the other thing. I don't remember the exact time that it takes for him to come back to life off the top of my head, but
Oh, sure, sure.
it's not very long, if I recall, that it takes him to come back to life.
No, there's a variability in there, just because I didn't want to be like a set number. But yeah, no, it's not too long. You have a nice reprieve.
You can run.
Yeah,
That's
correct.
about what it looked like you had time for, was to get away from him and then
Yep.
let him find
But
you
then you're
again.
you're still stuck there in his little demented sandbox.
Another thing that I actually found really kind of terrifying about him in this setting is how the yellow tatters and how he dons them. And I don't know how much you want me to reveal, because I want to leave a lot of this as like the
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it. I just, yeah, I wouldn't spoil the whole book, but yeah, we can
no,
talk about the yellow.
absolutely.
The whole point is Pan, His Majesty, and Yellow. I've been a little I've been a little opaque about the details, because I want there to be a mystery for people to really wonder what a connection like that would be. But giving something to the audience is a good thing too. So let's do that here.
All right, so the yellow tatters, when he's at his worst, he dons them and
Hmm.
he becomes Pastor,
Yeah.
from what I understood. But if anyone,
Essentially, he becomes like an avatar of Haster. He's oh man, go ahead and go where you're going with this, and then we'll circle back to
sure.
to
And then
the
if
to the earlier part.
anyone else dons them, I don't want to spoil this part of it, what happens, but it's bad news for them. It sounds like that if someone were to get the tatters from Peter and be like, all right, I'm going to
Potentially,
put this on and fight him with his own weapon, well, they'll see what happens when they
they will see what
read the
happens.
book.
Yeah. So we were talking briefly earlier, and I'll circle back to that. The story of Hyeta the Shepherd, and I may be pronouncing that wrong, but Hyeta the Shepherd by Ambrose Bierce um, introduces Hastur as this pastoral deity, who is very jealous and very possessive over this young shepherd boy, and who lives in isolation in this land of innocence and eternal youth. His only friend is the shepherd, sorry, is the hermit out near the pastoral fields, and they have these occasional discussions. And there's a lot of indirect allegory, I think, in that story between youth and old age, and um, just there's a lot of themes there. If anybody's interested, read the story. It's pretty cool. But I took that myth and pushed it forward into the Foster Peter Pan connection by tying Hyeta into Hyas the hunter from Greek mythology, the brother of the Hyades,
Yep.
the stars, and the myth of the Hesperides, and the stories of Peter Pan and the mermaids and Neverland, First Star on the Right, Straight On Till Morning, all of those different things, such that um, Peter Pan is essentially like I don't want to say his shadow is Hastur, but the shadow of Hastur looms more um, intricately and ominously than even his own real shadow that got away from him. So there's this very dark theme and connection where Hastur is the eternal um, end, the the other, the thing that is constantly trying to take you in and keep you. It's a very possessive and dark and malevolent entity, whereas Peter Pan is this like eternal youth. He lives in the here and now, whereas Hastur is outside of time and space and cannot experience the here and now. And there's this interplay between the two entities. Um, so uh, when Peter Pan dons the yellow tatters and takes on the avatar of the King in Yellow, um, he's taking that many more steps toward Pastor winning, essentially in that eternal dance.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it seems like they're both very jealous beings from what I was reading. So
Oh yeah, there are very few good guys in this setting.
I like it. Um, so one of the characters that popped out to me in looking through this, and as I said, I never read Peter Pan,
Sure.
but was Solomon Kaw.
Hmm.
Is that your creation or is that something that existed previously?
That was part of the original Peter Pan story. Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, the first story by J.M. Barrie, um, involves a little boy who doesn't want to grow up, get old, become an adult, do all the boring adult things. So he flies away out of his window one night. Whether that's a metaphor for him dying or whether that's literally him supernaturally flying away is open to interpretation. But he flies away and thinks that he's a little bird and lands in Kensington Gardens, like the actual Kensington Gardens, and he interacts with actual fairies and learns the language of the birds. He comes under the tutelage of this strange bird spirit being named Solomon Kaw, and Solomon, King Solomon the Wise, and there's clearly a connection there between the name and so this wise but kind of inept in the stories. He's very bombastic. I think he wants to be more intelligent than he actually is. But he takes little Peter under his wing and tries to like give him this tutelage and stuff. And I carried that forward as him recognizing the immense power this small child with godlike powers has, and he didn't want him to become this like horrible thing. So he kind of tried to guide him toward a less evil and more carefree path.
I will say it appears it did not necessarily work in your setting.
Yeah, that was a very dark story. I had read I believe it was Peter and Wendy when I was younger, back when I was like on a L. Frank Baum kick and reading all the Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass stories and all of the classic fairy tales when I was younger. And this time around, I did a deep dive and decided to read the original source material. And Peter in Kensington Garden is very long-winded, but it is very very dark. You get to kind of see the true capricious and even malicious nature of Peter Pan and some of the very strange characters. Like the prototype for Wendy Darling was a little girl named Mamie Mannering who has like a witch family, and she has witchcraft powers. Like it's some weird stuff. It's some weird stuff.
Now, Peter actually married Mamie, right? Is that
Yeah,
what? Yeah.
yeah. Technically, they had a fairy wedding. By the rules of fairy law, they were married. He forgot about it, of course, and she obsessed over it the rest of her life.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, oh, I just lost my place in my notes. So I did notice there are a bunch of tables in here,
I'm sorry.
and there are a bunch of tables throughout the book.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I love tables.
I love your tables. That works out. So, but what was your favorite to create for this setting, would you say?
Oh
If you
man.
had to pick one.
I think for this one, it's the D88 table of the Lost Children, because I was able to throw in a lot of pop culture and literary homages to so many different kid characters, from like everything from like the Goonies to the Sandlot to the Little Rascals to like it's kind of ridiculous the number of homages I put in there. I changed names and tried to imply descriptions, but I wanted to and some of them are unique, but most of them are clearly they're idea fodder for DMs to create archetypes on the fly, but there's enough of them in there that are familiar because they come from familiar archetypes. So while that was definitely not an original creation, it was the most fun for me to work on because I got to pull from all of those things I watched as a kid.
That's awesome. Um, so I noticed that there were. Trying to poke around. Some of my questions I've got here, I'm actually going, or not questions, but notes that I have, I'm going to avoid because
Oh,
while I agree that it is good to give some people a taste, I realize I would be digging too deep, and I really don't want to spoil that much for people.
that's fair.
But one of the things that I did notice is they're both random air and random island encounters, which I thought were really cool. Um,
I mean, the Peter Pan stories involve flying by various means. I mean, there's fairies that fly around. There are people that fly around through pixie dust or through good thoughts, depending on the version of the story. In a D&D setting, you're going to have flying brooms and magic carpets and the fly spell, and if you're playing in an edition or a version with a race of player character that has wings, there's going to be a lot of ways to fly around. So I wanted to make sure that there was a good encounter chart for the islands when you're flying.
nice. And another thing, I covered that. Covered that. Sorry, I've kind of lost my place in my notes. I'm going to have to edit this part out.
No worries.
um, oh, one other thing that I thought was really kind of got my mind going is how do you think this setting would work? Like pulling in something from like the modern era and pulling them into Neverland.
I think that would work pretty well. There are a lot of anachronistic elements in the never in this setting in the realm of the Neverlands. Um, you could run this as high fantasy. You could run this as steampunk. You could run this as historical. You could run this as modern. The key is just knowing that this is a demi plane where the laws of physics and the outside world are not necessarily going to be exactly the same. It's a place where a child with a frame of reference from probably the mid to late 1800s on Earth, um, some a child with a little bit of that reference, but mostly like a fantastical imagination. All adults are bad, and all bad adults are pirates, and there's mermaids in the coves, and there's creatures in the forests, and birds can talk and kids can fly, and so it's all about adventure all the time and good vibes only, or you're exiled for bringing me down kind of thing. Like, so you could do that with a modern setting, absolutely. You could replace the 1600s era tech of the pirates and replace it with like more modern stuff. I mean, you could go into Neverlands with a machine gun, but you're eventually going to run out of bullets.
Yeah, and you can't go down to the ammo shop in the
Correct.
Neverlands and reload. Cell
Correct.
phones aren't going to work there, which I think takes away that necessity to be like, oh, you don't have signal.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like,
So yeah, I mean, you could absolutely approach it with a modern mindset and a modern set of sensibilities with characters. I think that would be fun. If anybody ever does that, let me know how it goes. I'd be interested.
yeah, I actually think that's something I'm going to try just to see how it goes. And
It could be fun with was it like a kind of a D20 modern adjacent, or Call of Cthulhu, or something like that, having a more 20th century um, flavor to it. That'd be fun to see.
yeah, I was actually thinking Call of Cthulhu. Like, it lines up perfectly with Haster. So,
Oh yeah.
you know, why not give it a whirl and see what happens? So, um, what can you tell folks about Nowhere Land? That was another one that really piqued my.
That's original source material from J.M. Barrie. When children upset or angered or bored Peter Pan, when they were not entertaining enough, when they did something to betray him or insult him, or he was just done with them. If he didn't kill them, which he did quite frequently in the original stories, he would exile them to Nowhere Land, where he would forget about them and they would cease to exist as far as he was concerned. Um, I took that idea and developed it out further, where Nowhere Land is an actual place in the Neverlands, and while Peter Pan might forget about those exiled there, it doesn't mean that those exiled there cease to exist, and what becomes of them and what happens to them and what they become, and what might happen if they ever get out of Nowhere Land. Those are fun things that the book explores.
Nice. Yeah, I've definitely got to pick up Peter Pan in Kensington Garden. You sent me the link, so
Hmm.
thank you. I'm going to have to check that out because,
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to share that link with others. That's a public domain link too. It might give some people some interesting uh, ideas to chew on, mull over.
yeah, for sure. So, with this project, what made you decide to go with Indiegogo versus Kickstarter for your third project?
Sure. There were two reasons. First, I completely misjudged how Kickstarter works now versus when I first started using Kickstarter way back in the day. I don't have four um, verified fulfilled projects under my belt. It used to be two, now it's four. So that was my bad for not. And I was really excited to get on the Zine Quest um, get in on Zine Quest when it happened, because I really wanted to launch World Breaker and the Dark Tides of Zeratos then together, as opposed to developing them separately over time. So because that won't fulfill until January, like start shipping out until January, um, I didn't qualify for Kickstarter. In hindsight, I'm glad that happened, because Indiegogo, while it does not have um, the tabletop role playing game support and visibility that Kickstarter has, and it doesn't really have like the browsing interface that's as user friendly as Kickstarter does. It has what they call flexible funding, and what that does is you can set a goal, and you can choose to either have an all or nothing campaign like on Kickstarter, or you can choose to um, keep whatever you make, and then even if it doesn't make the goal. So I set the goal at an ideal number for an ideal size print run with the ideal specifications, but I'm going to make sure this limited edition book series happens no matter what, because I want to see it happen. I want a fancy Smithsonian hardback cover of this book in my hands, and if 20 other people back it, then me and 20 other people are gonna have that book. So the Indiegogo thing is cool. It's going to be a much smaller project in scope in terms of dollar signs, but it's going to allow me to make sure it gets done, regardless of whether that's 150 books printed, 500 books printed, or 1,000 books printed, or whatever. And if I fund on the lower end, but higher than the minimum to do a print run, I can still add ribbons and a nice cover finish, and other little features like that. Whereas with Kickstarter, I have to know what my logistics are for the number of backers in ratio to the amount of dollars in ratio to how much all of that's going to cost to fulfill. So this is nice, but the scope is much smaller.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like Indiegogo is kind of, I guess you'd say, easier route to go because you don't have, you don't have to, like you were saying, you don't have to worry about hitting, say $100,000. If you hit 50, the project still goes.
Yeah,
So,
correct. And I think that Indiegogo, I'm sure Indiegogo is great for other categories of projects. I hear it's really good for tech. But I think that for the tabletop role playing game space, it would be best serviced if you already have an existing um, community and fan base, like if you have a presence in the community that you're trying to sell your book to, your project to, and you have a project that is either already done or is something that you can fulfill without funding, um, or without as much funding as you would ideally like. And that's what this is. Like, I'm going to make the book happen, even if I just printed myself a copy. But by doing it this way, I can share it with other people in the world, break even on the project, and I don't have to spend it all out of pocket to send people books all over the world. And so that's really nice. And then after this is done, it will be available for general release. It'll just be a less fancy version. I'll do print on demand and PDFs, the standard route, and I think that'll still be a great book. It just won't have that deluxe feel.
nice. Yeah, I don't think there's any question as to whether it's going to be a great book from reading the review copy that you sent me. This book is just mwah, chef's kiss. I love it.
Oh,
So you're welcome. Um, yeah, there's so much in this, and I'll make sure there's a link in the description going to the Indiegogo. And you've got what, I think 18 days left now, 17 days.
well, let me find out here. Yep, 17 days left. So I would assume that's 16 and a half since it's evening time now.
Nice. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you're interested in a terrifying version of Peter Pan out there, folks, this is the project for you to back. And yeah, I cannot wait to get this in my hands and run it for people. So let me think here. If there's anything, I covered the Nowhere Lands, covered the Yellow Tatters. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention to folks?
Oh man. Well, I try to um I tried to make my version of this realm as unique as possible, and I am now very aware of if I'm saying his name wrong, I apologize, but Andrew Kolb's Neverland book. That's something I had purchased and refused to read until I finished writing this last year. And once I finished making this for, because this was originally released as a fifth edition book, and I can talk to you about the origin of it if you'd like. But
Absolutely.
I I made sure to not read the other one because I didn't want to be influenced. I saw that it was a beautiful book, and I bought it on that alone because I love fairy tales and folklore and mythology, and I love gaming, and I thought that his book was a great idea, so I bought it. I put it on the shelf, and then after finishing the writing on this, before doing the OSE conversion, I finally picked that up and looked through it. Man, that's a beautiful book. If you want to really fun, different kind of dark Neverland, go check out his book too.
Yeah, I've actually got
um,
it on the shelf behind me here where it's down, where unfortunately the camera doesn't hit.
yeah, no
But
worries. I think you can see my copy right there.
yep.
And I just recently purchased his Oz book too, and I've not read that yet, but I'm excited to. After reading his book, I personally want to take my book and his book and mush them together
Ooh,
and make like a super Neverland, and just run games in it. Like I usually don't tend to run my own games that I write. I tend to run just Gonzo old school games, just like traditional D&D. Um, which I don't know if that's normal. I guess it's like people that do movies that don't watch the movies they acted in. Um, but this I want to do. I want to take the two Neverlands and marry them together into this unholy Neverland story world because yeah, it's great the content between the two books. But the origin of it, so there's a some really good friends of mine are a traveling escape artist duo in primarily the Renaissance Festival circuit throughout the country. They are Dr. Judas Lynch and Miss Magnolia Strange, and you can find them at judasandmagnolia.com. So if you have big Renaissance fairs throughout the country, check your local ones to see if they perform there. They do great shows. They have a level of occultism and mysticism uh, to their shows, and they contracted me to do a tie-in RPG to their show a couple years back, and that was um, the Judas and Magnolia present Memento Mori, Memento Viviri. It's a very whimsical, grimdark setting based on like the cusp of the afterlife, where humans and ghosts live alongside of each other. Um, and there's a actually that's this book here.
that's a
So
beautiful book.
yeah, it's a fun one. You
That
can
is a
see the
cool
similar
cover. Yeah.
cover design to the new pan, His Majesty in Yellow. And there is a little throwaway, not throwaway. It's a little. Um, I'm not even sure what page it's on. There's a small section that the reference is essentially this setting because I liked the idea of a Neverland type place existing on the cusp of the afterlife. Um, since Peter Pan, the original stories deal with children ghosts essentially, and children being murdered by Peter Pan and this weird like demigod type boy child. So I was like, well, that would be cool if somewhere not too far away from this one island, this other series of islands exist where like there's kid ghosts. Um, so fast forward a couple years later, and they reached out to me and they're like, "Hey, do you want to expand that section and do this?" So we talked about it, and um, I made this. So they are selling 5e versions of both of those books, physical books at their shows. So you can purchase a very different version from them than what you're going to get here on Indiegogo. That is a fifth edition compatible paperback book. It has fewer pages, but the content's still very rich. I wrote it. I like it. But this I love old school essentials. I think it's one of the most well organized and user friendly versions of the basic expert edition of D&D, and I like old school D&D. So you can play this with basic fantasy, with any of the various like hack boxes, AD&D, etc. Um, but I designed it with OSE in mind because as a designer, I enjoy it. I enjoy that system as a designer. So this version has more content. There are more pages. There's more monsters. There's more lore. There's more. I was able to like do more with it than I was with the paperback version. And yeah, I'm excited about it.
Yeah, so am I. So speaking of monsters, what that you feel like discussing was your favorite monster to design?
Oh man, to design. My favorite stat block to design was actually Captain Hook, because um, as I was just saying, the original design was for fifth edition, and making any kind of martial oriented character in any of the newer editions since like third edition onward is very difficult to make a threat that's challenging to a group of players. So that was a lot of fun to design, and then taking all of the concepts and ideas that made him so scary as the ultimate pirate fighter, and then funneling that into um, how it could and would work through the lens of old school essentials. As a designer, that was a joy to work on, because I was able to um, give a lot of tactical elements that aren't crunchy and boring and awful as a DM to run, to a stat block with a lot of persona and character. Like he has a whole bunch of information just about him and his history and whatever. But bringing him to bear in combat, he needed to not just feel like a level 14 fighter. Like I love OSE and I love old school games, but a level 14 fighter doesn't have a memorable combat um, uh, mechanics built into it to make it super memorable to a group of players for him to be able to hold his own. So I took a few design, newer game design elements and philosophies and kind of bake that into um, the traditional old school stats so that he can hold his own against a large group of people. He's scary in his own right, um, but not just mechanically. He's got a lot of dark lore. He also ties into Haster pretty interestingly. The original Captain Hook had yellow blood, and he was afraid of his own blood. And the color yellow has a very strong theme in this story, or this setting. So I'm sure you can make some assumptions there.
Yes,
Some
absolutely.
actual monsters. I think the Chronodile, which was my take on the giant crocodile of the Peter Pan stories, was my favorite, because I got to basically create a kaiju crocodile that made sense in a uh, fairy tale horror setting. Um, the giant, you know, temporally affecting or time distorting crocodile is as much an iconic character in the original Peter Pan stories, but he kind of fills the role of like the classic dragon in myths and whatnot. He's this titanic uh, beast that's also just like marching to the implacable beat of the clock. So he's this force of nature as much as anything else, and he was a fun one to design and to write the lore for.
Nice. Um, now to kind of touch on the lore, I keep asking you what was your favorite thing. Um, what was the hardest part of the lore for you to develop?
Hardest part of the lore. Um,
I guess from combining everything, what was the hardest to really?
so I try my best as a writer and a game designer to not. Now, some people love to read just novellas worth of information. I try my best not to inundate readers with too much information, especially dungeon masters or referees, because some people are only going to want to use this to prep a game, and they're not going to want to dive into the lore and immerse themselves in the setting, and that's fine. So I have to remember as a designer that I'm designing for both groups, the people who want to be able to prep a game and run it and just take a little bit here and put it into their home games, mine it for ideas, and I'm also designing for the people who want the deep dive. So I had to find a way to weave a lot of lore into the book in a sensible way so that if you skip the two-page spread at the beginning that kind of gives a lot of background on Peter Pan and the setting, you're still going to get snippets of that throughout the other um, sections. You had mentioned Solomon Cobb before. If you're reading about his information, some of that ties back to Captain Hook, and some of that ties back to Peter Pan, and page references, of course. But that way, if you skipped that first part, you would at least, oh, I get it here. And if you skip the Solomon Kaw part. You might get a little bit of Solomon Kaw lore in another section, and so forth. So for me, the most challenging part was making sure the lore was integrated enough that it would be accessible throughout the book, but that it wasn't so saturated that it would burn out readers when they were trying to navigate the book. Um, so most of my layouts are on two-page spreads. Most of my information is condensed where it can be. Um, if there's something I can say in a paragraph, I try to say it in a sentence. But I'm not a minimalist designer either. I love minimalist RPGs, but I am definitely not a minimalist RPG designer.
Yeah, I have tried to come up with a few like settings of my own, and I have found that I'm too verbose and would wind up writing a book like that thick that could probably be that thick if I were.
Maybe you're a novelist.
Maybe.
Yeah, and that's okay. Write a gazetteer instead of rules mechanics, and then people can use that gazetteer to run their games in.
That would be fun. That kind of, you make me think of, is it Hot Spring Islands that has that kind of setup?
Yeah, it does. It's a two-book system where
Yeah.
one is player facing with all the lore, and the other is DM facing. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's in my future to write a gazetteer for one of your worlds, because
All right. Well, keep me posted. I'll be on the lookout for that one.
you never know.
Yeah.
um, I think that is everything I had. So I want you to basically be able to give the elevator pitch to anybody out there that might be on the fence about backing this.
Okay.
Because I think this should just blow up because it is a beautifully crafted
I
book.
hope so. I hope so for sure. I think it's a good concept. Elevator pitch. Okay. If
Not
you write
necessarily an elevator pitch, but if you were to, I guess, I don't know how to really phrase it, but if you were to be telling someone about this that was on the fence about backing it, to get them to hop off and run to Indiegogo and back it.
okay. This is a micro setting that can work as demi-plane plugin to any other game, any other system, whether you're playing fantasy, whether you're playing steampunk, whether you're playing historical, Call of Cthulhu, etc. While it's designed for old school essentials, the lore is clear enough and the ideas are concise enough that you can take your own system and rearrange it however you want. You can take the idea of like an ability from a stat block and do what you want with it. It is fun. It is dark and whimsical at the same time. It is terrifying if I did my job right, while also constantly making people wonder what's over the horizon, what's around the bend. Like it engages players because it's so freaking weird. And because it's based on Neverland, like the island, the imaginary island of Neverland. This my version of Neverland, because J.M. Barrie said there were many Neverlands. My version of it is that it analyzes that darker shadow that's always been there in the stories, and I took the darker shadow, like Peter loses his literal shadow in the original stories, and I took it in a direction of darker nightmarish mythos. I added the Haster elements. I added the dark witches in the forest. I added the shadow nightmare beasts. I added uh, all of these things that are difficult concepts for I think RPGs to tackle, and I bake them into the lore so that they're not just as monsters with a name. They're part of how the world works, and that's kind of cool. Um, this is way over an elevator pitch. I don't
Oh
speak
no, you don't
concisely. I
have to
write
worry about it
concisely.
being over any length.
Yeah, no, I mean it's Hastur and Peter Pan. It's Carcosa, the Lost City, and it's Neverland. The idea of interstellar cosmic mythological beings and the ramifications of their actions, the fear of death and the desire to exist eternally in the here and now, and the dangers and terrors associated with that. It also deals with themes of obsession and themes of um, accountability, maybe like responsibility. I think whether for your own actions or whether or not you should be held accountable for the actions of others. There are a lot of themes that, if explored, um, through different characters, different monsters, different regional settings. The Gazetteer alone, there's like what, like 40 some odd entries of different locations with
Yeah.
detailed hooks and rumors and stuff. Feel free to share screenshots. Uh, um, yeah, there's so much content in it that even if you don't use it as it is for its own self-contained setting, you can probably mine it for years for ideas for your own games for other things.
Cool. Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot to mine in this book. It is. I can't. Like I've said it probably 4 or 5 times now. I cannot wait for this to fulfill and to get it. So, is there anything we haven't covered? I feel like I went all over the place a little bit.
Oh
That
man, it's an all over the place kind of setting though. While it's, I think you can navigate it pretty well. There's so much going on in there. Like there's a lot in this book, and but it's not an overwhelming amount. Like I tried to give it like artistic layouts and tried to give it a good pacing. I didn't I didn't dive as artistic into it as books like Morkborg and things like that. You can see that there's definitely a little art punk inspiration on some of the spreads, but everything is still very legible and very gameable at the table.
yeah, I would
Um,
agree.
I don't know. What else? Like, if you've got questions, ask me. I'll answer them.
I'm
I'm
just
not even
trying to
sure.
think. I don't. I really. I personally, and I think kind of you do too. Um, I want to leave so many surprises so that people, when they read this, are like, "Oh shit, he did this," and it's
Yeah,
it's. I think people are gonna love it. I think that, from my own personal viewpoint, they should be backing this because they're gonna regret not having this limited edition version of it because it looks so beautiful.
I hope so. I genuinely hope so. And one thing to know is that the limited edition version will have a little more content than the general release version, just because I wanted to give a reason for this special edition to exist as a separate thing other than just its binding. That content will likely be made available as some sort of micro PDF as an additional, thing in the future, but it won't be available immediately. And as a hardback book, it will only be available as part of this limited run. I don't normally like gatekeeping content, so to speak, but I really wanted to give a little something extra to this special edition. Like I wanted it to be special not just for the materials. I wanted to have like this really cool artifact, and then I'm just never gonna make it again. I'm gonna only do the general release from here on.
Nice. Uh, yeah, like I said, that was all I had. There's more I would love to talk about that I think we could talk about off camera because I don't want to spoil this for people.
Oh yeah, I would love to.
And
For sure.
yeah, I think we should probably wrap it up.
Okay.
And yeah, folks, have a great night. And Wayne, I'd love to have you back again.
Oh yeah, I'd
Um,
like that. I've got some more projects in the works on the horizon, so
nice. Would
that
you like to
would be
talk
great.
about those or
I mean,
before we go?
sure. I'm in the middle of finishing up the editing and layout of Worldbreaker and the Dark Tides of Zeratos, getting the last bits of art coming in from the various artists and writers for the adventure paths, or not the adventure path, the adventures that are installments. They'll come out just after that. I plan to do a follow up for Dungeon Plumbers, ideally in summer of 2023. It might be fall. It depends on how scheduling goes because I'm kind of fast and loose with my timelines. But the idea for the second installment is not just expanded content of like monsters and things like that, but it's going to be um, the diesel punk aspect will explore more like world surface stuff, and it'll be a shorter section than Dungeon Plumbers, the first issue, and it will have a the bulk of the book will have a procedurally generated solo play version that will be a lot more crunchy than most of the solo games that you've seen out on the market. Um, I'm all for journaling, but that's not the kinds of games I tend to play. So this will be, I guess, more in the vein of like Rangers of Shadow Deep, the like tabletop skirmish RPG, where you've got your little war band that you build and move around and stuff, or you can play it versus other people. So I'm kind of taking old school essentials and turning it into a solo game slash tabletop skirmish game, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, I will be there
with
day one because that sounds
awesome.
so fun.
Other than that, the next big thing, well, the little things, I plan to continue to release more of my O5E supplements, which are my attempt to bring new school players into the old school fold by giving them familiar tropes in an old school style, whether that be like the warlock and sorcerer class, which I've already released, or more familiar like D&D races as well as racist classes, whether that be newer monsters that just don't have an iteration like they do like an older iteration, because we've got like decades worth of new content, um, but we have a system that was never really uh, in need of that much change, in my opinion. Um, I'm all for tweaking the system and making it more streamlined and house ruling, but that's why the older systems are good for that because you can take out chunks and add chunks in. But in terms of content, like if you're uh, not everybody's as motivated or creative or has as much time, or maybe you just like somebody else's idea and want to use it. So if you're not able or willing or interested in doing it yourself, like I want to be able to provide more options for people to like take the newer ideas and apply them through the old school lens.
Nice.
Yeah, those are the two near future ones. The other ones are further off down the road, but I've got some fun ones.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
It's been
my
fun.
pleasure.
Hope I didn't ramble too
Oh,
much.
no, I hope I didn't kind of veer off too much, you know?
No,
So
not at all.
I will make sure there's a link to the Indiegogo. And folks, if you haven't backed this yet, back it. This is going to be so awesome. And you're going to want this limited edition hardcover. And yeah, any other links that you would like put in there, we can talk after, and I can make sure that they're in the description because I'm all about promoting creators. So,
Thank you so much.
oh,
It's
thank
been a
you.
joy.
And yeah, I think that is it. And folks, have a great night. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the interview, give it a like. And yeah, and we'll catch you next time. See you later, folks.